has confirmed it's launched an attack on Iran.
The world watches as the long-standing tension between the United States and Iran erupts into a dangerous new chapter. What began as a routine display of military might quickly spirals out of control, setting the stage for a high-stakes aerial clash that will redefine the future of modern warfare. This isn't just another skirmish. This is a calculated trap set by Iran, meant to humiliate the United States on the global stage. But as the world holds its breath, something unexpected happens. What was supposed to be a triumphant moment for Tehran turns into a catastrophic misstep that exposes glaring weaknesses in their aging military forces. In the midst of this chaos, a single moment, a single decision, transforms the outcome of this deadly game. A single American jet, a F-14, makes its way into hostile skies. The stakes couldn't be higher. Iran, known for its intricate radar deception and electronic warfare capabilities, is ready to play its hand. Yet, what Iran fails to realize is that this fight is no longer about just firepower. It's a battle of technological innovation, of split-second decisions, and advanced tactics that are far beyond the reach of Tehran's aging fleet. As the two forces collide in the skies, the true cost of military miscalculation becomes chillingly clear. Tehran's reliance on outdated hardware and aggressive tactics clashes with the precision and power of American air dominance. But this story is not just about who wins or loses a single battle. It's about how power shifts, often in the blink of an eye, and how the landscape of modern warfare is being rewritten. In this unfolding drama, we'll break down the tactical brilliance and devastating failures that have led to this moment. Radar deception, electronic warfare, and aerial dogfights are just the beginning of the high-risk gamble that unfolded in the skies above the Middle East. For years, Iran's Air Force, armed with relics from the past, has posed a formidable threat, perhaps more through bluff than real strength. But as the F-14 roars into position, the complexities of modern air warfare are on full display. What happens next isn't just about military might. It's a crucial lesson in how quickly technology and strategy can turn the tide. A single miscalculation, a faulty radar signal, a momentary lapse in judgment. These can mean the difference between victory and disaster. In this episode, we'll take you inside the high-risk aerial gamble that shifted the balance of power. We'll show you how advanced tactics outmaneuvered the old-school equipment, how modern air dominance was proven once again, and how the US-Iran conflict moved into a new and dangerous phase. If you think you know how these conflicts unfold, think again. This is the story of how a planned humiliation for Washington turned into a shocking revelation of Tehran's vulnerabilities, and a clear demonstration of how quickly the power dynamic can shift in the skies above us. Stay tuned as we break down the complexities of modern warfare and the high-stakes gamble that no one saw coming. The US-Iran conflict had been simmering for years, a slow burn of escalating tensions fueled by nuclear concerns, proxy wars, and years of diplomatic deadlock. However, what unfolded on a fateful day in early 2026 was unlike anything the world had seen in recent memory. A dramatic new chapter in the conflict erupted when Iran set a calculated trap for an American fighter jet flying over hostile skies. What should have been a routine show of strength by Tehran quickly spiraled into chaos, leaving the military world stunned. In what appeared to be a well-planned and executed operation, Iran was seeking to display its dominance over US air power. It was a message to Washington. Iran would no longer sit back and let the US assert its air superiority. Tehran had spent years investing in advanced electronic warfare capabilities, which they believed would give them an edge over America's powerful fleet. This operation was supposed to be a crowning achievement, a precise strike that would humiliate the US and send a message to the international community that Iran was not a nation to be trifled with. They had spent months preparing for this moment, drawing up detailed plans involving radar deception, advanced jamming systems, and even misinformation campaigns. Iran's elite pilots, trained in the art of asymmetric warfare, were ready to take on the world's most powerful air force. However, what they didn't anticipate was the superior adaptability of the US military. On the morning of the operation, an American F-14 Tomcat, one of the last of its kind still in service, was deployed on a reconnaissance mission over the Persian Gulf. The F-14 had long been a symbol of U.S. air dominance, and despite its age, it was equipped with state-of-the-art technology capable of countering even the most sophisticated of adversaries. As the F-14 soared high above the turbulent skies, Iranian radar systems were tasked with locking onto the jet. What followed was a complex game of cat and mouse. Iran's radar systems began emitting false signals, hoping to confuse and misdirect the American aircraft into vulnerable positions. But the F-14 was not so easily deceived. The aircraft's sophisticated countermeasures detected the deception immediately, and the U.S. pilot engaged an advanced jamming system to cut through the Iranian radar interference. At that moment, Iran's well-laid plan began to unravel. The Iranian fighter jets, hidden behind layers of electronic cover, failed to close in on the American aircraft. What was supposed to be an ambush turned into a disorienting sequence of missteps, as the Iranian pilots struggled to adapt to the new technology that was now threatening their very existence. As the aerial confrontation escalated, the F-14 demonstrated its remarkable agility, performing maneuvers that had been unheard of in previous engagements. Iran's pilots, relying heavily on the aging fleet of aircraft, were quickly outclassed in every aspect of the engagement. Tehran's military was not prepared for a technological arms race, especially not in the skies. Iran's reliance on older airframes, such as the F-4 Phantom, which were decades old, left them vulnerable to the superior firepower and precision of the F-14. The aging jets, though still capable of holding their own in certain situations, simply could not match the advanced radar systems, missile technology, and countermeasures that the United States had brought to bear. The dramatic turn of events unfolded quickly. Iranian military command, seeing their carefully constructed trap falling apart, ordered their forces to withdraw. But the damage had already been done. The American fighter, now free of Iranian interference, turned the tables on the Iranian pilots. What was initially intended to be a humiliating blow to Washington had instead become a humiliating defeat for Tehran. As the F-14 returned to base, it became clear that Iran's attempt to assert dominance in the skies had backfired spectacularly. In the aftermath, the U.S. military hailed the engagement as a victory, not just for the F-14, but for the modern approach to aerial warfare. The event highlighted the vulnerabilities in Iran's air forces, vulnerabilities that had been concealed by years of rhetoric and posturing. While Iran had invested heavily in certain aspects of modern warfare, it had failed to keep pace with the rapid advancements in American technology. The confrontation in the skies was a stark reminder that technological superiority, when wielded effectively, could still decisively change the outcome of a conflict. It was a moment that changed the course of the US-Iran conflict, proving once again that in the world of modern warfare, power can shift in an instant. The US military had once again demonstrated that, in the age of advanced countermeasures and electronic warfare, it was still king of the skies. As tensions between the United States and Iran continued to build over the years, the root causes of the conflict became increasingly clear. At the heart of this animosity lay a complex web of geopolitical, economic, and military factors, with each side perceiving the other as a direct threat to its national security and regional influence. The US, for its part, viewed Iran's nuclear ambitions as a ticking time bomb that could destabilize the entire Middle East. In contrast, Tehran saw Washington's influence as an existential threat to its sovereignty and regional power. By 2026, these long-standing grievances had reached a boiling point, setting the stage for a dramatic escalation in the conflict. The immediate catalyst for the explosion of hostilities was Iran's nuclear program. In 2025, despite the US and European nations' efforts to curb its ambitions through sanctions and diplomatic pressure, Tehran had begun making significant strides in enriching uranium and expanding its nuclear infrastructure. This was the final straw for Washington, who feared that a nuclear-armed Iran would have the ability to destabilize the region and challenge American interests in the Persian Gulf. In a last-ditch effort to prevent this outcome, the U.S. authorized a series of airstrikes aimed at crippling Iran's nuclear facilities and military infrastructure. But the strikes were only part of a broader strategy to undermine Iran's ability to project power in the region. Tehran, however, was not blind to these efforts and had prepared for a military confrontation years in advance. The Iranian government had recognized the growing threat posed by the U.S. and had made concerted efforts to modernize its military, especially its air force. Over the past decade, Iran had invested heavily in the development of advanced radar systems, electronic warfare technology, and missile defense systems. Iran's leadership believed that these advancements would give them a fighting chance against the overwhelming superiority of the U.S. military. Their strategy relied heavily on asymmetric warfare, where they would exploit weaknesses in the U.S.'s reliance on high-tech precision weaponry and employ unconventional tactics to gain the upper hand. One of the cornerstones of Iran's defense strategy was its ability to deceive and disrupt enemy radar systems. For years, Iran had been working on a sophisticated network of jammers and decoys that would render the U.S.'s advanced radar systems ineffective. The goal was simple: to lure American jets into ambushes, where Iranian fighters could engage them at close range and exploit their own technological advantages. As the airstrikes from the U.S. continued to target Iranian military sites, it became clear that Iran's radar deception had already achieved some level of success. Over the course of several engagements, Iranian forces managed to divert or misdirect several U.S. aircraft, causing significant frustration among U.S. commanders who began to question the effectiveness of their own air superiority. At the same time, Iran had been quietly building up its stockpile of ballistic missiles, which were increasingly seen as its primary deterrent against a direct confrontation with the U.S. Tehran's leadership knew that a traditional war with the U.S. would be disastrous, so they focused their efforts on developing a weapons system capable of delivering devastating blows to U.S. interests in the region. As part of this strategy, Iran had launched a series of high-profile missile tests, including one that targeted a U.S. military base in Iraq, causing significant damage to infrastructure and signaling to the world that Iran was not to be underestimated. The missile strike, though not lethal, marked a critical turning point in the conflict, as it made clear that the U.S.'s presence in the region was no longer guaranteed to be unchallenged. In response to these growing threats, the U.S. doubled down on its military presence in the region, shifting more advanced fighter jets and missile defense systems into key positions along Iran's borders. The U.S. also made a concerted effort to strengthen alliances with regional powers, particularly Israel and Saudi Arabia, who had long been wary of Iran's growing influence. These alliances served to amplify the pressure on Tehran, further isolating the country on the world stage. As the situation reached a fever pitch in early 2026, both sides found themselves on the brink of all-out war. The U.S., increasingly frustrated by Iran's defiance and the inability of sanctions to curb its nuclear program, began to escalate its military strikes. At the same time, Iran, unwilling to back down, began to deploy its full military might, including airstrikes against U.S. bases and renewed missile attacks aimed at key targets in the Gulf. The world watched in stunned silence, unsure of how long this conflict would remain confined to the skies before it spilled over into a full-blown war. The situation was further exacerbated by a series of miscalculations on both sides. In one particularly tense moment, a U.S. Navy destroyer mistook an Iranian missile launch for an attack on one of its allies, resulting in a retaliatory strike that killed dozens of Iranian soldiers. This incident served as the final spark that ignited the conflict, bringing the two nations to the brink of a major regional war that could have catastrophic consequences for the entire Middle East. With both sides locked in a deadly game of brinkmanship, the question remained: could any diplomatic solution still be found, or had the moment for peace passed forever? As the conflict in the skies over the Persian Gulf escalated, the true dynamics of modern warfare were on full display. The aerial confrontation between the United States and Iran became more than just a military engagement. It was a battle of strategies, technologies, and split-second decisions that would ultimately shift the balance of power in the region. While the US relied heavily on its advanced fighter jets, radar systems, and precision weaponry, Iran's aging fleet of aircraft and reliance on deceptive tactics and outdated technologies began to show cracks. In this high-stakes gamble, both sides made significant errors. But one clear lesson emerged. In the age of electronic warfare and cutting-edge military technology, power could shift in the blink of an eye. The Iranian forces had been confident that their electronic warfare capabilities would give them an edge. After years of preparation, Tehran had invested heavily in radar jamming systems and decoys meant to deceive US fighter jets. The idea was simple: to make US jets believe they were being attacked by a much larger force, leading them into vulnerable positions. The Iranian pilots, trained in asymmetric warfare and familiar with the advantages of electronic deception, believed this would be their moment to prove that the US's technological superiority was not as infallible as the world believed. But what they didn't anticipate was the level of preparedness and adaptability in the US forces. The F-14, an aircraft that had been around for decades but was still revered for its versatility and adaptability, had been equipped with the latest anti-jamming systems. As the Iranian radar began its barrage of false signals, the F-14 pilot engaged an advanced electronic countermeasure that immediately neutralized the Iranian deception. The American pilot had anticipated this move and was prepared for the intensity of the Iranian tactics. This encounter in the skies marked a turning point for the Iranian forces, who had assumed they could outsmart the US military by exploiting their reliance on high-tech equipment. The Iranians soon realized that their aging fleet of aircraft, including the outdated F-4 Phantoms, couldn't compete with the modernized US fighters. The F-14 proved to be a formidable adversary, demonstrating not just its combat capabilities, but also its resilience in the face of aggressive tactics. As the battle raged on, the American fighter jet used its advanced radar to detect and track Iranian aircraft from miles away, giving the US an insurmountable advantage. Iran's reliance on older technology, including radar systems that were prone to malfunction under intense electronic interference, left them at a severe disadvantage. The real turning point came when Iran, realizing it was losing control of the skies, ordered its fighter jets to engage in a desperate maneuver. The Iranian pilots attempted to close the distance with the US fighter jets, hoping to use their superior numbers and dogfighting experience to turn the tide. However, this decision only played into the hands of the US military. As the Iranian jets tried to close in, the F-14 launched a missile strike with pinpoint accuracy, taking out one of the Iranian fighters. In the span of seconds, the balance had shifted entirely. Iranian forces, now facing a rapidly disintegrating air force, were forced to abandon their tactics and retreat. The aftermath of this encounter was staggering. Tehran's air force, which had once been considered a serious threat, was exposed as deeply vulnerable. Despite years of investment in electronic warfare and radar deception, Iran's reliance on outdated aircraft and equipment had left them exposed. The US had demonstrated not only its technological superiority, but also its ability to adapt quickly to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. What was supposed to be a humiliating blow to Washington had instead become a devastating blow to Iran's military credibility. The US military's response to the crisis was swift, and it wasn't just about the engagement itself. The victory was a clear statement. The US still dominated the skies, and no amount of electronic deception or outdated tactics would change that. Iran, unable to cope with the loss of its air superiority, was forced to recalibrate its strategy. The leadership in Tehran had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had overestimated their technological capabilities while underestimating the US's ability to adapt and respond to emerging threats. In the wake of the defeat, Iranian leaders began scrambling to reassert control over the situation, but the damage had already been done. The US had gained a strategic advantage in the region, and Iran's reliance on outdated tactics and aging aircraft had been laid bare for all to see. The psychological impact on Tehran was profound. What had begun as a calculated plan to challenge US dominance had instead exposed the cracks in Iran's military infrastructure. The following days saw a flurry of activity in the region. The U.S. military, emboldened by its victory, began to assert itself more forcefully in the Gulf. Washington pushed forward with plans to bolster its alliances with key regional players, including Israel and Saudi Arabia. These moves were meant to ensure that the strategic advantage gained in the skies would not be undermined by a resurgence of Iranian power on the ground. Tehran, on the other hand, began its own internal reassessment. Despite the devastating blow to its air force, Iran continued to rely on its vast network of proxies and asymmetric warfare tactics to maintain influence in the region. Tehran knew it had lost the air battle, but it was not about to give up its influence on the ground. The response from the U.S. military was not just about securing air superiority. It was about sending a message. Washington's victory in the skies was a direct challenge to Iran's military might, but it was also a reminder to other nations in the region that U.S. power was still the most formidable force in the Middle East. The U.S. began to strengthen its missile defense systems and fortify its military bases across the region. But the conflict was far from over. While Iran had suffered a significant defeat in the air, its resilience and strategic capabilities on the ground meant that the situation could escalate once more. What followed was a series of retaliatory strikes from both sides. Iran, reeling from the loss of its air superiority, launched a series of missile attacks against U.S. bases in Iraq and Saudi Arabia. While these strikes caused damage, they were largely ineffective in turning the tide of the conflict. In response, the U.S. launched air raids aimed at key Iranian military installations, including missile sites and radar stations. These operations were successful in degrading Iran's missile capabilities, but they also highlighted the broader strategy of asymmetric warfare that Iran had relied upon. Tehran, though suffering a significant loss in the air, remained determined to project power in the region through unconventional means. As the situation continued to evolve, the stakes in the U.S.-Iran conflict became clearer than ever. What had begun as a battle for air superiority had transformed into a complex geopolitical struggle with no clear resolution in sight. Both sides had made critical errors, but the U.S. emerged with a clear advantage in the skies. The lesson from this conflict was undeniable. In the modern age of warfare, technological superiority is not just an advantage. It is a decisive factor that can turn the tide of a conflict in an instant. For Iran, the lesson was equally clear. Relying on outdated tactics and aging equipment in the face of rapidly advancing technology would lead to devastating consequences. The power dynamics in the Middle East had shifted once more, and the U.S. had once again proven its dominance in the skies. As the dust settled over the Persian Gulf and the echoes of the battle between the United States and Iran faded into the history books, one undeniable truth emerged. The modern landscape of warfare had irrevocably shifted. The skies had been the battleground, and the stakes could not have been higher. What started as a mere tactical exchange soon evolved into a global lesson in the complex relationship between military technology, strategy, and the ever-present human element. From the outset, this was never just about who controlled the skies. It was about who could master the future of warfare, a lesson that no one could ignore. The technological gap between the U.S. and Iran had been apparent from the beginning, but it wasn't just about superior weapons or advanced fighter jets. It was about the adaptability of modern warfare, where technological superiority is often only as good as the strategic decisions made in the heat of battle. In the end, it wasn't the size of the air fleet that mattered most, but how quickly the forces could adapt to the rapidly evolving situation. Iran's reliance on outdated hardware and defensive systems meant they could never fully counter the U.S.'s flexible, technology-driven tactics. While Tehran's leadership had long assumed that their electronic warfare systems would outsmart American jets, they didn't account for the U.S.'s constant innovation and adaptability. The conflict revealed just how much power can shift in a matter of minutes when technological prowess is in play. The United States, once thought to be invincible in the air, faced an unexpected challenge. Yet in the end, the American military's ability to quickly adjust to the changing circumstances gave it the upper hand. The F-14, the old workhorse, had proven itself as more than just a relic of past conflicts. It was a symbol of how the US military could take an aging platform and breathe new life into it with modern technology and tactics. Iran, on the other hand, remained mired in the past, its outdated systems failing to cope with the realities of modern aerial warfare. This battle also served as a reminder of how power can be fleeting. The high-tech tools and weapons that once seemed to guarantee dominance in the skies were not infallible. What was meant to be a humiliating blow to Washington quickly exposed critical weaknesses in Tehran's aging fleet. The world witnessed how quickly power could shift in the air. One moment, Iran's forces were poised to deliver a crushing defeat to the US. The next, their aircraft were retreating, leaving behind a cloud of disillusionment and missed opportunities. For the United States, this was a victory that carried a deeper message. It was not just a military win, it was a political statement. Washington had, in a single engagement, reaffirmed its position as the undisputed leader in technological and tactical warfare. The skies over the Middle East were no longer a place where Iran could challenge American dominance. The results of this engagement sent a clear signal to other nations in the region. The balance of power in the air had permanently shifted, and the US had not just survived this clash, but had emerged stronger than ever. But the implications were not limited to just military superiority. For Iran, this defeat carried profound consequences. It shattered the narrative of Iranian resilience and superiority that had been built up over decades. Tehran, faced with the undeniable reality that its air force had been outclassed, was forced to rethink its strategy. No longer could it rely on outdated equipment or tactics to challenge the US. The world saw Iran's vulnerabilities exposed, its reliance on older technology laid bare. But Iran's story was far from over. The defeat in the air was only one chapter in a larger narrative of resilience and determination. Despite the loss of air superiority, Tehran remained a formidable adversary, one that would adapt and evolve, even if its methods would have to change. In the aftermath, both the US and Iran were left to reflect on the lessons learned from this high-stakes confrontation. The US had reaffirmed its dominance, but the future of air warfare would no longer be solely about technological superiority. Strategy, adaptability, and real-time decision-making would continue to play critical roles in any future conflict. For Iran, the message was clear. In the rapidly advancing world of modern warfare, standing still was no longer an option. The game had changed, and the skies, once again, were a battleground where only the most adaptable would survive.